Hello to everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Lights in the Sky podcast. I am your host, Krista Alexander, creator of the documentary The Lights in the Sky. I decided to start this podcast as a way to give voice to different ideas regarding UAP, and I really want to take that voice and look at the phenomena rationally and logically with evidence. So I was making my film, The Lights in the Sky, and I was in production, and I saw this other documentary called The Living Sky by a fellow UAP filmmaker, Scott Deschaine. And I thought he did a great job at this theory. It was very unique. And we actually spoke a few days ago, and we decided to have this podcast for you guys today to share new ideas that don't really get looked at enough, despite the fact that that is where the evidence leads. So I'm really excited to speak with Scott today. We have a lot of evidence to provide you all during our conversation. You'll be able to see that. It's going to include images and video, academic articles, and historical documents, plus much more. So thank you so much, Scott, for being here today for the first episode of the Lights in the Sky podcast.
Thank you, Krista. It's an honor to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I thought your film was wonderful. It provided a really fresh insight into the whole phenomena of unidentified aerial phenomena. And I look forward to chatting with you about all kinds of fun stuff.
Me too. I'm excited. I'm a little nervous. My first podcast, but you've been so great. Yeah, you've been so patient with me figuring all this out. So I'm so thankful, and I think it's going to be worth it. So first, please tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, I am a filmmaker and a writer. I have produced educational comic books, websites, and movies. I'm working on a feature film now, a fiction feature film. But my background included a lot of production of educational materials, specifically about conservation and natural resources, and studying all the aspects of habitats and natural resources and wildlife and the different, range of life on the planet. Made me a little more aware of, how complex all the ecosystems on our planet are. And I've always been fascinated with creepy stories and scary stories. I used to read stranger than science books when I was a kid, and they would talk about weird things that people had seen. And then as I got older, I continued reading about UFOs and weird things that people had seen, and realized that there were a certain core group of people who were really looking at it with a reasonable eye. They were like journalists. They weren't trying to impose some sort of preconceived belief on the topic. They actually collected good evidence. So I sort of steeped myself in a lot of that material, like John Keel, Ivan Sanderson, Harold Wilkins. They wrote some great books that was just talking about the evidence. And part of me thought, well, there's got to be an answer to this. It's such a weird phenomenon. There's so many weird things, but there's got to be something that makes sense. And some of them had actually talked about the possibility that what people are seeing in the atmosphere are living things. But a lot of them fell short because they were trying to propose that the living things that people were seeing might be from another dimension or some weird kind of energy beings. And when it started to click for me was when I began looking at marine invertebrates and started to realize that what people were seeing in the sky was very similar to what people were seeing in the oceans. I mean, so it's really not like we have to make any kind of big leap or kind of speculate about some kind of weird unknown technology. I mean, there are very close parallels with what we know actually lives in the ocean. So I just think it's a huge unexplored area of science. I don't think we've even scratched the surface yet. So that's why I'm excited about it. That's why I've kind of been pursuing the whole idea.
It's like you mentioned earlier before we started, this is kind of an obsessive hobby that you kind of have to be careful with, because it really is like a rabbit hole. You go down and there's so many different avenues, and you just want to know the truth. And sometimes you almost kind of have to wonder if you're ever even going to get there. But I do think that with scientific evidence, we can get a little bit closer, right?
I think that's kind of our obligation, is that, if we see something that seems to make sense and is scientifically valid, it's kind of like a kind of a gift and sort of an obligation to say, okay, well, we got to explore this. So I have to ask, this is your initial podcast here. How did you get involved in the topic, Krista?
So I was always kind of into paranormal stuff, but I'm actually more of an academic at heart. I was about to finish my graduate degree in communications and media management, and I was, a broadcast journalist in the military. I make videos for fun on my free time. And then I was open to the idea. I think that was a prerequisite to kind of coming down this path. I was open enough to the idea to actually look at the video, right? I mean, I looked at the video. That's it. You don't even really have to zoom in and adjust brightness and contrast. It's there if people just give it a moment, And when it finally clicked that I was seeing something that was not explainable, oh my God, it was life-changing for me. And, I've always kind of gone through down a spiritual path. I kind of look at everything very deeply, very analytically. I kind of always have. So it wasn't too difficult for me to apply that kind of thought process to the UAP. But now I'm kind of in the world of UAP and I'm realizing um, how important and how influential the psychological component of it is, which circles back to, my graduate program, my undergraduate program, and my interests in personality theory and things like that. So I'm excited to kind of broach from that subject. But I think it's very important to not guess what this is. I think it's very important to understand what evidence is and why is evidence important, and why we can't trust our five senses and why we can't trust our own minds. And that's a concept that I think a lot of people have problems with, right? If we can't trust our own minds, what can we trust? Well, you can
Well,
trust the data, you can trust the evidence, you can trust the science.
I think
So I'm excited to, and I know you kind of feel the same way, right?
that's a very important observation. Is we have to realize our limitations. Where we are on the scale of life, and of creation. It's like we tend to think of ourselves, as I'm sure every organism does, as the center of everything. We're the top of the heap. We're the top of the food chain. We're the best. But as you mentioned, we have to realize the limitations of our senses and our ability to process and perceive and conceptualize what we're actually perceiving. So a lot of people come to the topic with a lot of preconceptions, and they latch onto an idea and they tend to interpret the evidence to support that idea. And I think the challenge is to actually look at the evidence, to try and filter it for quality evidence, and then try and say, okay, what are the possible hypotheses here? And that's one of the reasons that is kind of drawn me to this particular hypothesis. Is I've tested it and tested it and tested it and said, okay, if this is the case, what would we find? Might we find this? Might we find that? And looking around, it's like, yeah, we seem to find a lot of things that seem to support this hypothesis. I mean, the internet has been a world-changing tool. So in this particular topic, you can say, well, if we find this, do we ever, if there are creatures like marine invertebrates moving around in the sky, uh, we might see like blobs falling out of the sky, like jelly falling out of the sky. Let's look. Has anybody ever reported jelly falling out? It's like, oh my gosh, yes, there's all kinds of reports of blobs and jelly falling out of the sky. So
Yeah.
you start exploring. You say there's a lot of evidence, but the challenge is, you look at the old evidence, and this is one of the things that's sort of a challenge about this particular field, and I think it's a developing field of science. There's a lot of effort and time spent on looking at past evidence. We get one clip, one fuzzy video clip, and everybody goes, oh, it's this. Oh, no, it's this. Oh, it could be this. And part of my goal is to say, look, we can say these things are unknown. Let's try and find out where they're seen, where they're regularly seen, and let's hypothesize that these are something that we can actually get a good look at. And let's try and take the best technology that we have and get a good look at them. So instead of looking at stuff that we saw and trying to figure out what it is, we can actually get a good look at them and see, for sure what they are. So,
Right, starting from, don't assume you know the answer. It's kind of more of a divergent thought process than a convergent thought process, which I feel like is how a lot of people tend to approach not just this phenomena, but life itself, life
yeah,
itself, you know what I mean? So it is important to kind of have that open mind, and just let the evidence show you the way.
right. And then you
I
have to be
want to
really
talk to you a
considerate.
little bit about you oftentimes report about the lights in the sky being marine invertebrates. But I have looked at the sky and I've seen a lot of lights that do behave and are described as sea creatures, but I also see them oftentimes move like insects. What do you think about that?
Well, when you look at the realm of invertebrates, I mean, it's incredibly diverse. And this is one thing that I think challenges a lot of people, because to understand this hypothesis, not only I got to think about how diverse the reports of UFOs and UAPs are. I mean, they're at all levels of the atmosphere, all different sizes, all different phenomena. I mean, there's ball lightning, will-o'-the-wisps, swamp gas, sprites, discs, rods, all kinds of different things. So it's an incredible variety and shapes, sizes, movements. And we see that same type of variety in marine invertebrates. If you think of the life cycle of an invertebrate, they reproduce sexually and asexually. They can be nearly microscopic all the way to gigantic. The same organism in its life cycle might have 20 different stages. We don't even know about some of even the more common marine invertebrates, how many different stages they have in their life cycle. So this is one of the challenges. I mean, we see the movement that they have is incredible. They propel themselves, they can change their own buoyancy, they can create their own vortexes to ride upon. So there's just a lot of different parallels between what we see in the sky and what we know happens with these creatures.
Right. So I think what you just said is going to be a great time to share with everyone what we saw the other day about that cruise captain who said that she saw a giant black jellyfish in the sky. Can you see that screen, Scott?
I can.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play this now. Let's see if hopefully the audio works.
I had a drone on board, so I thought it would be a nice night to catch a sunset. I had the drone in my hand, and someone said, "What's that?" And we look up, and there was, I put it on TikTok, it looked like a black jellyfish, a gigantic black jellyfish, and it sailed right over the retreat, directly through the center line of the ship, right through our X and our stack, and just floated through. Thing was, we had no wind, maybe 5 knots at the time, but this thing was cruising along about 10-15 miles per hour, just cruised right over, and as it passed the stern of the ship, it went a couple hundred meters, maybe 300 to 400 meters, and then it started to descend into the water. But because it was sunset, we couldn't put a rescue boat down to go see what it was, but it disappeared into the water. We have no idea. It wasn't a drone, there was no noise associated with it, so if you want to see our UFO, it's on TikTok.
So there's the video, and this is the actual video she posted with her cute little turquoise text, right? So I want to play this as well. I was kind of hoping to see it kind of move like a jellyfish, almost kind of expanding out and coming back in as if it was pushing itself through the atmosphere. But if you watch this video, it just kind of just stays the same the whole time. Well, so what are your thoughts on that?
That's one of the interesting things about jellyfish propulsion is that they can actually hover nearly motionlessly. They kind of maintain, and this is what people report about a lot of UAPs, a lot of these objects, that they seem to just hover motionlessly and then instantly they just whoosh, disappear. So we tend to think of jellyfish as just being, blown around by the waves, moved around. They're just passive things, but they're actually very active swimmers. They're really, really good at propelling themselves. And some of them can actually just hover because they're the same density as the surrounding medium in which they live. And an Australian Air Force captain, I think, investigated the propulsion of jellyfish. And he found that when they pulse their ring, they have like a ring of muscle around. All they got to do is pulse their ring like this. And they create a vortex of air beneath them, or whatever fluid they're in. Water, he was talking about. And then they ride that. They ride it. So with a simple just pulse like this, they're just above and out of our sight. So that we see that a lot with these objects, is that they seem to hover sometimes for a really long time. Sometimes so long people just they lose interest in it and they walk away. And then sometimes they'll come down and just with one pulse just be gone out of sight. I think one of the challenges is, the scale of the habitat that we're talking about is, much bigger than we're normally used to thinking about. And this is one of the challenges to our investigating this. We're used to thinking of the terrestrial habitat. Things have to move a certain way. These things might move through avenues that, cover oceans and continents and not even blink an eye, so to speak. But
right. Yeah. So when you say that these are similar to sea creatures, you don't mean they're actual sea-like creatures who can fly in the sky. What are you saying, that they're a whole other form of creature we don't understand that just so happens to share similarities with sea creatures?
I don't think we know at this point. We actually know that there are some sea creatures that do move through the atmosphere for part of their life cycles. So this is a manta ray that's taken to the air. That's one. Here's another one. Now, these kind of resemble types of objects that people have reported. Some people report these kind of ray-shaped objects moving through the atmosphere. Now, typically what people report, and these are just some. Now, so these are a marine animal that's actually moving into another medium here. And we know how big some rays can get. These are some of the smaller ones. Now, how apt flyers, can some of the bigger ones be?
Okay, so there's this woman out in Maui, and I got all of these emails and posts and comments of these lights that were seen in Maui, and it's kind of blurry here. So I'm going to read this tweet that someone had shared, and there was many angles filmed of these lights flying in formation. And this person said, "I'm pretty sure we just witnessed the same thing over West Maui tonight. Our phone could not pick it up, but the best way to describe would be a large cluster of at least 100 white and blue light orbs flowing across the sky like a whale underwater or a manta ray. It was beautiful."
Wow.
So let's go ahead and watch this just for a moment. And
Sure.
This isn't the best angle. It's so difficult to film these lights at night. This person's going to flip their camera here, and we're going to get a much better view. Here we go. And it reminded this person of a manta ray, the way that they're flying. Now, I know this isn't exactly what you're saying, because these are multiple separate, at least 100 autonomous orbs of light flying in the shape of a manta ray. Have you seen videos like this before?
Yes, in fact, there's a lot of them. This one's a beautiful one. But the question is, we don't know if they're individual lights or if they're actually part of a larger organism. It's interesting. Have you heard of the Phoenix lights?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Right. Okay. I looked at those, and there's a ring of them, and it looks like a partial ring. And you think, well, are those separate lights, or are they part of a larger organism? So this is one of the questions. We see lights in the sky, and we know that some scientists think that up to 90% of all marine life uses some kind of bioluminescence. So one of the common features of UAP are the lights that they generate. So that's one feature in common that they share with marine life. But when you look at the lights in the sky, and from our perspective, we're not sure if those are individual lights. Some of them must be individual lights, but some of them might be on the periphery of a larger organism. Now, when you think about the Phoenix lights, let me show you this one organism real quick. This one organism real quickly.
Wow.
It has, you can see there's several different types of bioluminescence that we're seeing.
Yeah.
The main source in the middle, and then they enhanced that little ring down at the bottom. So if we were seeing a giant aerial organism that was passing and falling to Earth, we might see that ring. That kind of reminded me of what the Phoenix lights look like. I don't know if it's true or not. And this is the thing. This is all speculation at this point. But when you look at that type of bioluminescence, it's very similar to the types of things that people are seeing in the atmosphere. So I think that one might be one avenue for further study, is to get someone who knows how to do spectral analysis and look at some of these lights and say, okay, what materials are we seeing? Because we know marine organisms use certain processes to produce bioluminescence. Some of them are chemical reactions, and some of them they have symbiotic bacteria that produce I mean, they actually have, organisms living within them that produce light. So if we look at the lights in the sky with some kind of spectral analysis, maybe we can see if they have the same compounds that marine organisms use.
Okay.
This thing hovered for a while. And you can see in the middle, this changes shape. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. This changes shape, but you can see that there's a light in the center. And a lot of times what people see, let me get to the part where the light actually comes on. There's the light.
Wow.
Okay. And this thing, there it's really going.
Yeah.
Now this thing hovered up there for, I think, a couple hours. This is kind of the highlights that are stabilized. So you can see that that light is visible, but if this was at night, this whole body structure might not even be visible. We might just see this light. So some organisms have different types of light generating organs at different parts around their body. So that's one of the challenges, is what is the structure we're actually seeing up there?
Yeah, I've edited a lot of videos of these because I remember thinking the same thing, and they fly in ways that look like I've edited videos of lights that come in a circle, but when you zoom in on them and you adjust the brightness and contrast, there's nothing there. And the lights kind of like go over each other and then come back again. And I've never been able to see a video where separate lights are actually connected at all. It's always separate lights. But I am open to the idea of there being some sort of other medium that we can't see, connecting these lights together. I mean, is it possible that there's some sort of invisible electromagnetic connection between these lights, like a jellyfish, I don't know. I feel like that for me is a bit of a stretch, to be honest, because I guess seeing it is believing it, and I've never seen anything that indicates that. You know what I mean? But it is an interesting theory, and I think that's why a lot of people think of UFO spaceships, because they see the three lights in a triangle or around something, and their first thought is those lights are on something. I can't see that thing, but I'm going to assume it is. I don't know why a UFO would have bright lights on it at all times, but a spaceship, I should say. But yeah, who knows? Maybe it is possible. I know the Condign report came out with the same concept, that the lights were just separate balls of plasmoids, not connected, but giving the appearance of being connected. But maybe we should be open to the fact that they are connected in ways that we haven't been able to observe. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, I think I'm kind of an all of the above sort of guy. I believe that, everything that we can think of, nature's probably already done. So there are some organisms that have multiple structures on them. And the way people describe their encounters with UFOs, some of them describe it as a big flashing light. Some of them describe multiple lights. Some of them describe lights moving around what seems to be an object. So, probably by any kind of configuration we can imagine, they have. Let me get back to your question about whether these are actually organisms that move from the oceans into the atmosphere. Okay. One thing we like to do as humans is, we name things, we draw boundaries, because it's easy that way for us to process and conceive things. But in reality, there aren't boundaries between different things. There's no cap on the ocean. There's no boundary at the edge of the planet. There are interfaces between different densities of mediums, but things move between these different mediums. So we know there are types of organisms that move. They live part of their lives in the water and part of their lives in the atmosphere, such as mosquitoes, mayflies. People have repeatedly observed objects going into the water and coming out of the water. In fact, there's a great clip of an animation of this group of objects emerging from the ocean near Catalina Island. And it's like hundreds of discs coming out of the water and moving into the sky. So they might be organisms that spend part of their time in the ocean and then part of their time in the atmosphere. Some of them might move through the atmosphere as adults. Some of them might have eggs or spores that move through the atmosphere blown by the winds. Their life cycle is incredibly complex, and we don't understand it. One of the videos that I have on my YouTube channel on my website is with a scientist who kind of discovered and studied freshwater jellyfish. His name is Dr. Terry Peard, and he taught about jellyfish. And one of his students said, "Hey, we found these in a lake near us," and he said, "Well, that can't be. Jellyfish are in the ocean because they don't show up in ponds and lakes and rivers." And the student said, "Well, yeah, they do." So he put up a website and he asked people to report where, if you see jellyfish in bodies of fresh water, let me know. And so to this day, he's collected reports, hundreds of reports from all over the world where these jellyfish appear by the millions in a lake or a pond or a river where they've never been seen before. And I said, "Well, how do you think they're getting there?" And he said, "Well, part of the speculation is they're moving through the atmosphere somehow." So he found that there was a phase of their life cycle where they're kind of like a cyst form. They're flat, they're nearly indestructible, and they could dry out. He subjected them to intense temperatures. He froze them for 5 years, bombarded them with radiation. And then when he dropped them in the water, they just poof, pop back to life. So imagine, now imagine you got an organism that can produce millions of these types of cyst forms, and they're blown about inert until they reach, a nice, warm, moist atmosphere. And then all of a sudden, the conditions are right. Boom. We might see, hundreds or millions of them at once, just all of a sudden seeming to mature all at once. And that's what we see a lot with, algal blooms, jellyfish blooms, and the reports of UFO armadas or fleets in the atmosphere. It's really fun to see some of those. I mean, people are down below looking at hundreds of objects moving through the sky, and what are they? We don't know. But,
yeah. So, I've seen a lot of videos, I'm sure you have too, of the lights in space moving like creatures. So do you think that those water creatures have somehow moved into the atmosphere and now can also transverse space, outer space?
I don't know, but I think it's a possibility worth exploring. As I mentioned, I don't think there's an edge at the edge of the atmosphere. I mean, it's not like Earth's atmosphere ends. We recently discovered that our atmosphere extends beyond the moon. We've been able to actually detect our atmosphere beyond the moon. So think how far that is. And if something moves through that fluid medium, and this is one thing we tend to take for granted, is the atmosphere is a fluid medium. And, it might move beyond the planet. And in fact, I looked at this idea, okay, people think that, we're on a planet and we're moving through space. It's not like you see in the pictures where it's a nice, neat little ball. I mean, we're spinning around, we're crashing, we're running into stuff, thousands of miles an hour through space, and space isn't empty. So stuff is coming into the atmosphere all the time. This one scientist, I think his name is Lawrence Frank, wrote a book called The Big Splash, where he investigated the possibility that there were mini comets, watery comets, hitting the atmosphere every day, all the time. It's stuff, water coming into the atmosphere. Now, all that water probably isn't sterile. So it's stuff that's seeding the atmosphere all the time. And I thought, well, I wonder if the reverse is true. Is there a way where organisms could possibly defeat gravity and actually rise up through the atmosphere and escape into space? And there are these fountains of energy near the poles where matter from our atmosphere is ejected into space. And if you actually look, I actually have a video of UAPs that have been recorded near auroras near the poles. There's a great one from the space station. And you see these objects moving through. In fact, let me show you. Got the capability to show you.
Well, while you're looking, do you mind if I read the backstory of the Big Splash? Just a little synopsis for everyone listening.
Go ahead.
So the man he's referring to is Louis Frank. He wrote The Big Splash, and he is a physicist from the University of Iowa who said that millions of small comets made of ice and water strike the Earth's atmosphere every year. The continuous influx of cosmic HO, I'm not sure what HO is, according to his theory, created our lakes, H2O maybe, created our lakes, rivers, and oceans, and will one day submerge the planet. The existence of small, previously undetected comets was confirmed in 1988 by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Wow, so he's saying that he thinks the Earth is one day going to be, we're getting more and more water all the time. Is that basically what he's saying?
That's one of the implications of that. Is, you know, the traditional idea is that all of Earth's water came at one time, and it sort of condensed and then fell to the Earth, and it's been a closed cycle ever since, that we only have so much water. But if you think about it, we're constantly being refueled by watery comets. It's kind of like, wow, the balance, you know, like I said, the Earth isn't a closed system, and this idea is that there's new stuff coming in all the time. And
it's interesting that he's saying that the planet will be submerged in water from these comets. I mean, that's what, I don't know if this is, I can't remember the link I found this from, but it was, you know, back when he wrote it a long time ago. The book's pretty old, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's been a couple decades now.
Yeah, but it's been his theories have been being proven correctly since then, haven't they?
Well, but I pretty much so. But I don't know if that means that we're going to be
submerged. Yeah, I wish I had saved the link for this.
Escaping,
but I know it was credible. It wasn't some like random site. But I'm going to go ahead and continue here. He says that he maintains the small comets could have carried organic materials, the seeds of life, to Earth, and may have triggered the extinction of dinosaurs. He is an impressive individual. He helped calibrate the first U.S. lunar probes and has made a number of discoveries in astronomy. So, yeah, I think, you know, someone like that might know what they're talking about, right?
Well, he got a lot of pushback on that. I mean, a lot of people said that, hold on just a second, I'm trying to locate the actual video of the auroras here. He got a lot of pushback on that but he looked at the evidence. He was studying the atmosphere, satellite images of the atmosphere, and he kept finding these weird blips. And he said, well, what are they? And then his theory, with his hypothesis, was that, well, they could be comets, moving into the atmosphere. And then when he looked further, he found that there seemed to be supporting evidence of that. So that's just one aspect of stuff that's entering the atmosphere.
Yeah, I wonder what those blips were, if his hypothesis was right. I mean, maybe his blips were just the UAP.
Well, there's an idea that it's called panspermia, that there's life throughout the universe. And if you think about it, that's kind of an attractive idea, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, to think that life is confined just to our Earth sort of requires you to think of us being in a closed glass, like a terrarium, and it's not. It's a system where there's a constant exchange of materials. So some scientists have speculated that we would find jellyfish-like objects on Jupiter. And
I know, I love that's a great theory.
And the idea that we might find them on Europa. And in fact, scientists think that beneath the icy surface of Europa might be oceans, and oceans probably would contain some form of life. So we know that when the comet Shoemaker-Levy hit Jupiter, we recorded it ejecting millions of tons of material into space. And if all that stuff was ejected, suppose there were some kind of organisms on Jupiter, and suppose they produced these kind of, these sort of cyst-like parts of their life form, or eggs that could survive in space, they would travel across. We might see that sort of mechanism for seeding life throughout our solar system. And I would imagine that we're going to find out that sort of seeding goes on, all the time throughout the universe. All right, so these are auroras over the atmosphere. And this gentleman was taking a picture of the auroras. And he saw this object up here.
Weird.
Okay, now there's another, and one of the challenges is that these things might be up there, but because they're mostly the medium in which they live, we don't see them most of the time. Our eyes have limitations. So in a case like this, where this energy, where the solar energy is exciting the Earth's atmosphere and causing it to glow, this might reveal something. So this is a shot from space. And look at these objects moving through the auroras.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. Those balloons are sure strong, aren't they?
So it's like, now these things are defying, they're defying gravity. Gravity, it's not even, they don't even seem to care. I mean, they're just swimming. They're just going right up. I mean, it's kind of amazing. So that's just something that they caught accidentally.
Yeah.
And it's not like,
I can't believe more people aren't talking about this.
well, there are several challenges to it. First of all, you have to kind of be familiar with the extent of the phenomena, the number and variety of things that people see in the sky. And a lot of people don't even want to approach the subject because it's kind of been discredited. So I think that's one of the challenges, is first to make it look like a valid field for scientific study. And then I think for people to say, well, there's a relation to life forms that we already exist. You're not seeing too many marine biologists looking at UFOs. So I think there's kind of, in science today, we have incredible depth of knowledge, but I think sometimes there's a lot of specialization, and we don't necessarily see that kind of cross-pollination that we need.
Right, I completely agree. I want to talk more about the connection with UAP and water. And you had sent me this video, this newscast. This woman had a security camera overlooking her pool, and she caught this strange light phenomena that is kind of webbed-like, and it started looking like it was doing something with the water in the pool.
She noticed strange lights swoop in over the pool.
And I realized that it was something that was not normal.
Here's what she saw at first glance. It almost looks like a saucer-shaped object up top. Then it goes down into the pool and expands like a web, moving back and forth. After nearly 30 minutes, it starts to disappear. Thomas says bugs fly up to their cameras all the time, but this...
So just really quick, I want to sneak back here. Do you see this shape right here where it has the two kind of like orb spherical light, and then you have this connection between it?
Yes.
Okay, well, I want to share that because this is common. The lights do this. I got a great example here. I know this is heavily digitized. Unfortunately, that's just how the data presents itself. But you can very clearly see these two spheres with the light connecting the two. And then I have actually another example here in just a moment. I would like to play this light someone sent to me. It was just a few months ago, really. And she lives in Hawaii. And she said that she was standing on the shoreline and she looked out into the water, and there was this blue light over the water. And you can kind of see there's like the waves crashing here, and there's the sand, and then there's the ocean. So it's not very far away from the shore. And I have to say, this made national news. And there were multiple videos and perspectives of this same light flying in the sky. She was lucky enough to be where she needed to be to film this in the water. So I'm going to go ahead and play this now. She said it looked like it was drinking the water. I'm going to adjust the brightness and contrast a little bit so you can see this. And in just a moment, you're going to see an electrical appendage, a tentacle type object come down into the water. There's some movement down here. And in just a moment, you'll see that tentacle. There it is. I'm going to play that back.
That's amazing, isn't it?
It's just amazing because you can very clearly see something swoop down. And, this kind of has like a worm cylindrical shape to it, which is very similar to a light I filmed for my documentary, The Lights in the Sky, which was Steve Barone's film, which people say is a helicopter, which I obviously don't agree. But there's this light flying in the sky, and all of a sudden it stops, and it's flashing randomly. And I find other lights behind it talking. So this is the part of my documentary where I applied ketones to it. But the reason why I'm sharing it right now is because I wanted to look at the worm-like movements of this light. You kind of see how it reaches out back and forth.
Yeah, it's like expanding and contracting, isn't it?
Right. And it was kind of beautiful because I felt like this light had personality. I know we shouldn't anthropomorphize the unknown, but it really did seem like it did. And what's also interesting in this video is near the end, it also does the barbell shape. I'm going to scoot out so I can find it quicker. Right about there. It does the barbell shape, and then each sphere of that shape flashes on its own.
Well, that's amazing. And we see that kind of thing a lot with these lights, is that kind of splitting. And that's similar to what marine invertebrates do. There are times in their life cycle when they actually bud and split and separate. And that's one of the first things that actually got me thinking that at least some of these lights might be living things. I traveled to Marfa, Texas, where people regularly report seeing lights across a plain there. There's nothing out there, but people see lights moving around. And as I was sitting there by the side of the road, they have a viewing stand there where you can actually, I thought, well, this has got to be crazy. But no, there's a viewing stand, watch the Marfa lights here. And you see lights browsing around the vegetation out on the desert. And then one of them got very, very bright and rose up into the air, and then got really bright and then split into two. And then each piece started moving down independently and browsing around. And I thought, that's like a living thing. I said, that's just like you kind of see that kind of splitting. And so that's kind of that was one of the first light bulbs that went off when I first saw that.
Yeah. Well, I also want to share this other video with you too. I think it's great. Okay. This is, you don't have to, I did not adjust this video. This is the original. I will zoom in here in a minute, but can you see that screen?
I can.
Okay, so we can very clearly see this white little dot. I know it's hard. It starts acting up, and I want everyone who's watching now to kind of see what that reminds them of. Okay. So let's zoom in. You can see it's doing the same thing as in Steve Barone's video. So I'm going to adjust it just a little bit more here. And you see how it's flipping around on itself? Well, I live in Virginia now, and it rains a lot. And I had a pot full of water outside, and I walked out, and I saw these things in it. And I said, oh my God, that looks just like the lights in the sky. They move just like the lights in the sky. And what was it? Mosquito larvae.
Look at that. That's
unbelievable. It really does move as a form of natural, evolutionary, biological propulsion efficiently through any given medium. So I thought that was amazing. I think there's a lot to that. And one thing I also want to share regarding this is that pilot Alex Dietrich, who saw the Tic Tac, she said that Tic Tac was jumping from spot to spot. It wasn't like gliding and moving like you would expect some sort of nuts and bolts mechanical craft. It was jumping. In fact, the guy who coined the term flying saucer, Kenneth Arnold, he didn't say it looked like a silver saucer. He said it was moving erratically and jumping as if it were a saucer being thrown, skipped along the water.
Skipping, right.
Right. And then we just took it in our own minds and we're like, oh, it's a physical saucer-shaped craft. And then we just ran with it with pop culture. And now people really hold on to this belief, right? Even though all the evidence says that this is what we're seeing.
So let me ask you, Krista, I mean, you probably know this, but Kenneth Arnold, he was kind of called to the study by his experience. And he became a lightning rod for the topic. And a lot of pilots and a lot of people reported their experiences to him. And after studying this thing for almost the rest of his life, he said that they had to be some kind of living creatures in the atmosphere. I mean, pilots described things flying up the planes like having some kind of ray. They called them ray fish. They had rippling edges to them. Now, this is a guy everybody knows because he was the guy that, they said, flying saucers was coined from his experience. But he concluded that they had to be some kind of living thing. So why Why didn't that stick? Why?
I think it's because it's boring.
But it's not boring. It's incredibly fascinating.
Well, we don't think it's boring. We obviously think it's amazing. But I think for the majority of people, it's boring. You have people who really, really want Star Trek to be true, you know?
They want the ETs to come down. Do you think that's it?
Or they want to have a one-on-one special type of, relationship with God, or, whatever they have in their minds, that's what they want to be true. It's that convergent thought process that we mentioned earlier. They're not following the data. And then when they have evidence that goes against their viewpoint, they literally act like it doesn't even exist. They don't even pretend, or they come up with some amazing excuse to kind of make themselves feel better, I guess, for ignoring the evidence. It's interesting that you were talking about how we do look into the sky and see the fact that these must be living creatures. We know the CIA said it in their documents. And I also saw this interesting article written by the professor of entomology, which is the study of insects. She was also the head of the Department of Entomology at the University of Illinois. And she wrote in the American Entomologist an article called "The Truth About Insects is Out There." And she said she also believed that the lights in the sky were living creatures similar to insects, or, any sort of Earth-like creature, marine invertebrates, for example. And she said many insects don't develop wings until their last molting stage. Perhaps whatever these things are, they had their final molt and have flown off back to wherever they originated. So she's assuming they're not from here, but from somewhere else. And I thought that really kind of fit your theory quite nicely.
That's an interesting idea. Well, actually, I just found a couple of clips recently of supposedly these big armadas of lights that the space station recorded leaving Earth's atmosphere. So who knows? Maybe they come down, and Earth to them is like a pond, where they had their larval form, and then when they're ready to leave, poof, they just waft off. These are supposedly hundreds of lights moving through space.
I've edited this video.
Oh, you've seen this video? Okay.
I've edited the video. This is one of the ones I was thinking about just now. I'm glad that you brought it up, because this is a perfect example of the lights flying. This was from the ISS facing away from Earth, right? These are not city lights. That was some of the skeptics were saying that this was city lights viewed from Earth, but I went and got an example video to show that there was no real comparison, unless there was some sort of fakery CGI-ness to it. I haven't confirmed that. But yeah, this is amazing. It's like the Manta Ray video.
Right there. There's hundreds of them.
Yeah.
So
they're not connected, but they look like they're connected.
Yeah. Well, this is real evidence, and it's hard to say when jellyfish sort of start. There's a point in their life cycle when they're anchored, and they start spawning off the little miniature medusa forms, a medusa form that we think of when we think of jellyfish. But at a certain point, there's still sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 of them pop off at once, and they're still connected, and they have to split as they sort of wiggle their way free from the medium in which they're stuck together. They're kind of gelatinous matrix in which they're stuck. Let me go ahead and quit out of that and get back here. Actually, let me show you one more thing about in my film, The Cohoke Light. There was a gentleman, you talked about the object putting the tentacle down into the water and sucking something up. This gentleman is a hunter in Virginia, where people have seen these mystery lights moving around this river, and he described an encounter that he had with a large object over the river. And let me see if I can get his.
All I could see was the lights and the shape of it, and there was something that it was doing. It had a light that was going down to the water, and it looked like the water was coming up that lake.
Oh my gosh.
And that's enough for me to see. And
did you ever see anything like that before? Anyway, so this is a down-to-earth gentleman, and he was appreciated the chance to share his story. But and that's I've heard that in many other stories too, of objects coming to water, putting some kind of appendage in, and pulling stuff out of the water.
So now we have video evidence and we have witness testimony of separate events that correlate. And when you start noticing these patterns, you cannot be of an analytical nature and not look at these patterns and know that there's validity to them, I think.
There's all kinds of cool stories. There was I think an Australian rancher who saw weird lights outside in his farm, his ranch. And he went out the next day, and his water tank that was full, like a water tower, it was full the night before, was empty. The lights were hovering over it, and the water tank was empty. And he said at the bottom, all that was left was like a swirl of mud where that was all that was left. So something came down and sucked all the water out of its water tank. So
you know what you just said reminded me of something that I wanted to talk about. I'm sure you're familiar with cattle mutilations.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I would like to hear your theory on what you think those are.
Well, when we talk about marine invertebrates, they're some of the most advanced predators that we know of on the planet. They are truly apex predators, and they hunt with a variety of different methods. Some of them give off neurotoxins. They can actually spray, like squid can actually spray toxic gas into the environment and puff it at their prey and stun them before they even know they're stunned. Jellyfish may have a large body, but they can extend tentacles way below where their main body is. And they have millions of little stinging cells that inject neurotoxins into their prey, and then they suck them back up to the main body where they're digested. So if there are objects like, living creatures like marine invertebrates moving through the atmosphere, we might see this kind of evidence of some kind of predation. And the cattle mutilations that people have reported sort of fit the profile perfectly. A lot of times the victims, the cattle, don't seem to have even been disturbed. They don't seem to have put up a fight. It's as if something just came down, stunned them, and then pulled them up, did its work, fed on them or whatever, and then just dropped them. And it's not a rare occurrence. There have been cases when it's actually considered an emergency because so many cattle were disappearing. When I went down to Marfa to record the lights with the Travel Channel, I talked to the rancher that was down there. And he kind of looked at me out of the corner of his eye when I told him about this hypothesis. And then he told me, he said, we had a herd of antelope. He said, they have people come out and do big game hunting there. And they stock the ranch down there with a herd of antelope. And he said, virtually overnight, they disappeared. And I said, where did you think they went? I said, there's like something killed them, their bodies? And he said, nope, they just were gone. And he said, what you're telling me makes more sense than anything I can think of. And again, this is a guy who's like a no-nonsense rancher in Texas, and a herd of antelope just gone.
That's amazing. I'm so glad that you said that, because I was doing some research and I thought, if these are living creatures in our atmosphere and they behave in evolutionary efficient ways that we can see now, such as worms or jellyfish biologically propelling themselves, what about, how they eat and what they eat? And I discovered bowflies, which are flies that eat human flesh. And you don't even have to be decomposing. They'll eat it even if you're still living. Yikes. And they're known, these insects are called Carryon insects, and they eat soft tissue parts, such as the eyes, nose, mouth, and if exposed, the anus and the genitalia, which is what's missing on these creatures. So I feel like that's another indicator that they're being eaten, right? It's not like they're taking their lips away so that they can somehow genetically study the cow's DNA. I don't know why, alien creatures, humanoids would want cow eyeballs and lips. I can't figure that one out.
The world's worst scientists. They have to keep coming down and getting more specimens. They can fly to here from another planet, but they can't grow cows. That doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah.
And then if you want to, what's really terrifying, there's a gentleman named David Paulides, and I don't know if you're familiar with his work. It's a little scary, so it's very scary. Be prepared if you want to have some sleepless nights. He has a project called Missing 411, and he started.
I love that movie. That was a good one.
Okay, well, yeah, he produced that movie. But he has hundreds of reports of disappearances in national parks, and so if you were going to think of these savvy predators, UFOs generally have been reported to not want to be around humans, bunches of humans. But suppose you have humans away from their support system, away from their cars, away from their apartment buildings. They're out in the wild. They might be easy pickings for these type of creatures. So I don't know if that's the case or not, but some of the stories that they report, like he reports that people sometimes disappear, even in a group of hikers. The last hiker will just all of a sudden disappear, or children will disappear when their parents just turn their eyes away for a second. And sometimes the bodies or remains of the bodies are found on cliff tops or places where it would be impossible for the victim to have climbed. Something had to have carried them up there. So this is the kind of evidence that you can't say it proves it, but it tends to think that, well, maybe there are some kind of aerial predators. But we won't know until we get new evidence. And I think that's the big challenge right now, is how to get new evidence.
So I remember I studied Travis Walton when I got into this, because that's one of the more famous abduction cases, as I'm sure you know. And in the film, they make it seem like this electric beam from like a la Star Trek came up and like slowly carried his body up into this spaceship. When what actually happened was that this electric charge came out and pushed him off, and it was an electric charge, just like what I imagine to be what that guy in Virginia saw, and what we just saw with the blue light in Oahu. It's some sort of an electric tentacle or appendage that came out. It wasn't a light beam sucking him up into a spaceship.
Well, that's
and there's
interesting.
Go ahead.
A scientist, John Schuessler, did a report on effects of UFO encounters on humans. And he cataloged all the effects that people had, the physical and psychological effects, their short-term and long-term effects. And I compared these to the effects of marine invertebrate neurotoxins. As I mentioned, they have some of the strongest neurotoxins that we know of. And there's almost an exact parallel. Short-term eye irritation, skin damage, skin burn, long-term muscle and nervous system degeneration, psychological effects. But a lot of people have reported when they are shocked by these jellyfish, or when they're stung by a jellyfish, they say it's like being hit by an electric bolt. Mm. So I actually met Travis and asked him, I said, do you ever, I kind of threw out the hypothesis, I said, do you ever think you might be like a modern day Jonah who escaped from the whale? And he says, well, people have called me worse things. He's amazingly down to earth.
There's a lot of religious references to this, because, we've been seeing lights in the skies for thousands of years.
Right.
So what do you think about abductions in general? Do you think, I know we have to say, I just want to say this up front, get it out of the way. There are a lot of people who are fantasy prone. Maybe they have some severe trauma as a child, and now they're having some issues that they're working through. There are different mental issues. I know not everybody likes to hear this, but it is true. And it's something that if we really want to understand the phenomena, we have to understand that those things happen. However, do you feel like there's a small fraction of these reports that really have had abduction experiences like we're talking about?
It's hard to know. I think, again, we have to stick with the evidence. I don't know of any evidence where we actually see something taking somebody. I'm sure, as you mentioned, you put in a very sensitive way. A lot of people think this might have happened to it. It may have actually happened. But for us to say conclusively that it does happen, I think we have to see evidence of that. Now, we do know that many people have encountered these things. And in fact, John Keel said a lot of the witness reports that we get might be from those who were lucky enough to get away. So, maybe there is a relationship there. I mean, I suspect there are probably a whole range of these types of creatures. Some of them are probably benign. Some of them might be predators. Some of them may actually be beneficial. And at some point in the past, I know this sounds kind of weird, we may actually have had partnerships, mutually beneficial partnerships with these things. If you look at a lot of ancient civilizations, there's a lot of myths of objects, sometimes described as creatures, sometimes as gods, coming down from the sky. And in fact, it was so important to reach up to these beings or creatures or whatever they are, that all over the world, people built pyramids. They built structures to reach up to the sky. They actually went up on top of the pyramids to offer something to the creatures, which might mean they might have some kind of beneficial effect on our climate, on our environment. And these people knew that we had to have a good relationship with them. I know it's all far-fetched, but when you read some of the myths and think, well, could they be describing animals? Some of them, Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent. One of the Egyptian pharaohs described a giant beast with a round mouth emitting foul odors coming down, and it stunned his warriors. So there's a lot of myths like that. And then we have to look at the evidence of these structures that were meant to reach up to the sky. But this is all speculation at this point. But I think that, I wonder, there was actually, let me see if I can find this video. I don't know if you heard it. There was one video of a young boy who said that a UFO was following him home from school, like every day. I think that video has been removed from the internet. I saw it years ago, and it was kind of creepy. This kid was in front of his house, and it was like, there it is again, It was up above in the sky. It was this kind of balloon-like object, and he said it was following him every day. And it just makes me wonder, maybe these things have certain, pets or relationships or people that they feel compassion with. I don't know. We keep pets, but Charles Fort said he wonders sometime if we're property, that we were seeded here by other creatures. But this is all speculation. Again, we have to get back to the evidence. All right, the parents are watching this thing. And it's in the kid's bedroom. Now, if this was my kid, I'd probably get in there and say, yeah, get out of here. I'm not sure I'd sit there and watch it. But here's it. It's resting on the sheets while the kid's sleeping.
Weird.
Bathing him in some kind of light.
Is it glowing? Is it radiating light onto the blanket?
It's radiating light.
Huh.
And this is them. The reason it's moving around is they're filming the nanny cam. But there it is.
Okay.
I mean, that's to me, that was a little bit, it made me wonder, what are some of these things actually involved with people? And do some of them take a shine to certain kids? But.
So when you describe the lights in the sky as being animals, I kind of, in my head, I think of them as being like, they're just up there doing their own thing. They're not necessarily greater than we are, or better, or more superior, or technologically advanced, or whatever. They're just another life form on this planet that we're sharing. But I know a lot of these religious mythologies and such have this idea that they're very godlike, that they're all-knowing, that they're godlike. What do you think about that?
Well, I think a lot of people do want to have something higher, something bigger than themselves, to give some meaning to their life. And I think that's a noble feeling. I think that's kind of a universal feeling. And if we think about like the force of life and spirit that we see all around us, I think it's undeniable that there's some kind of, cosmic force of life that sort of impels everything. But in the scheme of nature, we might think, just like you said, these might be organisms that are just doing their own thing. They're eating, they're reproducing, they're dying and spawning, and they don't interact with us except as it benefits them, usually. But, until we know, I just think about, some people have fantasies about the space aliens are going to come down and share their knowledge with us and help us advance and give us all kinds of benefits. Well, of all the species on the planet, how many have we interacted with and said, hey, we're going to share our knowledge with you and make life easier? We just don't do that. So we have partnerships and exploitation relationships with some organisms, sometimes unwilling. Think of all the organisms that live inside of us, our microbiota. But we're not out there actually saying, we're going to make your life better. So I think to assume that these things are going to come down and try and make our lives better, I don't know, we might be waiting a long time for that.
Yeah, I think so too. I have the thought process that these lights are terrestrial, and that they were the first living creatures to appear on Earth back when Earth was still mostly gaseous, water, rainy, all the time type environment. and that they've been here way longer than we have, and they're going to be here way longer after we're gone. I don't have this idea that humans are special or that we need to continue our species, or, you know, somehow or another we're the apex of species. Yeah, I look at it from a much larger window. I think that we aren't that important. No, I know some people might say that makes me cynical or something like that, but it's
I
truly
think we're
kind of
pretty
how I see
important.
it.
I mean, I don't know any other creature that could do that does a beautiful painting like you have behind you there. I mean, we got art.
Yeah, I got that out of a thrift store, actually, believe it or not.
That's beautiful. It's great.
Thank you.
So, I think we are worth propagating, and I think that's actually one of the I think that's one of the reasons that it's important to study these things. There was a gentleman who wrote a book called The Seven Mysteries of Life. The guy's name was Guy Murchie, and one of his big mysteries of life was called the blossoming of worlds. He said at a certain point, civilizations reach a point where they're going to change. It's like a flower. It grows as leaves and it stores all its energy, and it says, all right, time to take that risk. And it puts up that flower, it puts all its energy into putting up that flower to try and spread itself, to try and spread its life. And you got to wonder, are we near that point where we're going to say, okay, it's time to take that risk. Let's go out to the stars. Now, if we can find organisms that are actually pretty effortlessly, regularly moving across galaxies, we might benefit, if that's one of our goals, by thinking like invertebrates. We're thinking about putting ourselves in ships and moving ourselves physically there. But with our technology, perhaps we can learn from these things and maybe adapt some of their models, put ourselves with our nanotechnology into these kind of, cyst-like dormant forms and spread by the millions out on solar winds. Who knows? But we might even be able to piggyback with some of these things and say, okay, you're going out there, we're going to hitch a ride on you. So we might have a chance to form partnerships with them, but to do that, we got to learn more about them. And I think there's a huge opportunity to learn from these things in terms of, medicine, chemistry, climate, life sciences. There's all kinds of, it's a whole new frontier of science that we haven't even begun to look at yet.
Well, I think that's a beautiful theory. You may have just converted me. I am a misanthrope, I think I would define myself, unfortunately, but I do care deeply about humanity and life. But, we're just messing things up, and there just doesn't seem to be enough people who care. So it's hard for me to have hope, I guess, but if your theory is right, that, because it's not like we just got dropped, we just like humans just formed one day and then we're here and then there'll be no more humans. I mean, if the theory of evolution is correct, we were, tree monkeys at one time. So if we're still in our animal lizard brains, and we're just on this path to something else, I mean, that's what evolution is, right? So we may not be human Homo sapiens as we know it forever, but the seed of who we are will become something else entirely.
Wow,
I mean, we can only imagine.
Yeah, that's a whole new thought. That's an amazing thought. Yeah. I mean, and don't be discouraged. I mean, as I get older, the idea of paradoxes brings me comfort. The two totally opposite things can be true at the same time. So yeah, people are, we're destructive and we're kind of crude and we cause a lot of problems, but we're also, incredibly inventive and caring and the source of so many great things. So both things can be true at the same time. So hopefully we'll find our better selves and carry on.
I'm holding out hope. I really do try. And that's actually why I made my documentary, was just to get people to start thinking and asking questions, and to wonder what if. And that's why I'm sitting here today with you, is just to kind of get people kind of wondering about these things and wondering about the nature of reality and who we are as a species, and then the world and reality itself. And you can look at it spiritually or scientifically, but I'm of the mind that every true scientist is also a spiritualist, I think, in my mind. Not necessarily religious, but someone who just kind of wants true knowledge. I mean, what's the definition of enlightenment? Wisdom, and truly understanding that we don't know anything at all, actually.
Well, we don't. And the more we know, the more we know, the more that we don't know. So I think it's interesting. some scientists, the more they study science, they think there isn't a God, and some scientists, the more they study science, think, oh yeah, now I believe more in God. So it's just what your definition is, but the quest for knowledge in itself is never ending. But I think it's a worthwhile endeavor, and I think this is an area where there's not only a lot of potential benefits, but I think there's actually some need to do it, because for our own safety and also for the protection of our habitat. First of all, I think for safety reasons, I mean, we've seen a lot of cases where planes have actually run into things in the atmosphere. All right, I think it was Carmelo Anthony posted this on his Instagram.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is, and they said that it collided with a bird.
Really?
Here's another picture of it.
A bird.
I don't know. Now, it would seem to me if they hit a goose or something, that the goose would probably vaporize.
I know.
But
weird.
And this is now the Chinese had they had another similar encounter.
จอดฉุกเฉินเนี่ยจมูกเครื่องบินเป็นแบบนี้หนึ่งจะฝูงนกก็คงจะไม่ใช่จะเครื่องบินอะไรมันก็ต้องเห็น
And this is what they report.
หรืออะไรสักอย่างแต่ทีนี้เนี่ยทั้งนี้ทั้งนั้นเนี่ยนะคะเจ้าหน้าที่สืบสวนด้าน UFO ของรัฐบาลอังกฤษเนี่ย
something actually.
So they have a graphic there of an actual saucer-shaped, alien spacecraft. Is that what the pilot said they saw, or are they just making assumptions?
Some kind of disc-shaped object actually hit the plane and left that damage that was there.
Yeah.
So there are many reports of planes encountering these objects. So that seems like one basic reason to figure out what's up there for safety reasons. We got to make sure that, people are talking about space tourism, and as we're flying more in the atmosphere, we got to make sure that we're not stepping on any toes, or that they're not going to encounter any kind of unwanted contact with these creatures that are up there.
Why do you think that they're so attracted to nuclear power or nuclear bombs?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know there was in the late 1940s and early 1950s, there were a lot of encounters where people said the saucers were coming down, the saucer people were coming down and telling people, you have to stop testing nuclear bombs. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there are a lot of supposed people who had encounters, contactees, were saying that the visitors were telling them, you got to stop doing this. Now, I don't know what these things are, but if they are in the atmosphere and they're a higher being than we are, and these little apes down on the ground are starting shooting off nukes, you'd think they'd find a way to say, hey, knock it off. You're polluting the air up here. Stop doing that. So I don't know if that's the case or not, but there was some kind of urgency back then that something was telling people, you got to stop doing this. Now, it's funny because the latest report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence speculate on the idea that people say we see these things a lot around Air Force bases and around military bases, around airports. And they speculated wisely that maybe we're seeing them there because that's where people are looking at the sky. I mean, they might be all over the place, but that's where we have the equipment and the people that are looking at the conditions of the atmosphere, and that's where they're seeing them. So I don't know. I mean, that was a big question to me about. I know there were reports of these things coming near bases, and then they found that the codes were scrambled and some of the weapons were disarmed, and I can't even explain that. I mean, I can't even begin to attempt to understand how that happened.
Why do you feel like you are opposed to the lights in the sky being like terrestrial creatures for reasons of propelling and so on and so forth, but that they're not of an electromagnetic nature in and of themselves, like living plasma?
Ask me that again, Chris. I'm not sure what you mean.
So you were talking about how you think the lights in the sky are kind of like a gelatinous atmospheric biological creature. My kind of idea now, and I'm totally open to changing my mind, is that they are plasmoids that are intelligent, because we know for decades now that plasma gives indications of being a living thing. So do you think that these are intelligent electrical connections, kind of like, our physical bodies as humans are our hardware, but the electromagnetic side of us is our software? And if you take that hardware away, can that software still exist autonomously? And so I kind of feel like that's what these lights are, but they're still having to obey certain laws of physics, like biological propulsion. Or do you think they're gelatinous? They're not going to the fourth dimension. They're not electrical, whatever.
Well, again, I think probably all of the above. I think we're limited by our senses and by our ability to conceive things. And I think we're also limited by our tendency to put things in categories and to draw lines between things. So it's like you mentioned, we're creatures of energy and matter, but there's not a hard line between that. So whether they're plasma, whether they're life force, whether they're gelatinous material, whether they're gaseous material, and we don't know. It might be all of the above. Each one in different forms might be all of those things. But that's kind of reason enough to study them. I mean, there's a form of life up there. There's many different forms of life that seem to be up there that are beyond what we know of. So to me, that's more mind blowing than somebody in a hardware rocket ship flying around. That's kind of like us. I think the idea that you got these creatures that might be able to pass in and out of different phases of existence, might be able to generate their own light, might be able to travel vast distances and instances. That's mind blowing stuff. So I don't know if it serves us well to try and say they are this, pin them down. I think we got to say, what could they be, and explore and see if the evidence supports those ideas. And then when we get the new evidence, then we got to be flexible enough and nimble enough to say, okay, this is what we found. Where do we go next? Because we got to adjust where we're going. And as it happens, our knowledge is going to grow and grow and grow. And hopefully the benefits to us will grow and grow. But is that evading your question well enough?
Yeah, I think so. It's amazing that we have, God knows how much money. I mean, probably billions, I'm sure, especially ever since the beginning of the program started, of trying to find living life, millions of light years away. And it's dozens of light years away. Why aren't we looking here in our atmosphere at the surrounding bubble? I mean, we can look around. We're the only, you said earlier we're a pond. Well, if we're a pond, we're a pretty awesome pond, because we're literally the only pond in this entire solar system. Right. And unless maybe they can find something magical underneath one of the moons of, under the ice of one of the moons of Jupiter or something, who knows?
Right.
But we know that we are the home planet of living creatures. So I wonder if they are these scientists and all the money that's going into these programs and these projects. Could you imagine if we used that money to look at just our own planet?
Well,
and what we would be able to find?
I think we're kind of on the verge, Krista. The revolutions like this start small. And I think, you and I talking like this is sharing this knowledge, and hopefully it'll propagate with your viewers and your listeners. And maybe, people will start thinking about this, sharing this with scientists, because this isn't speculation. This is, hard and fast evidence. And to look at this evidence with an open scientific mind, I think you got to say, well, there's an avenue for exploration here. And I'm going to predict that in the not too distant future, if we just take the tools that we have now and just start looking at some of the places where we see these things, we're going to find a whole new realm of life forms. Now, why haven't we done it? I think it's mostly because of our perspective. We live on this tiny sliver of arable land on the surface of the planet. That's our focus. And the atmosphere is just, we look at the ocean and we're like, oh, there's so many areas of the ocean, so many different life forms, so many unexplored things there. There's so much life there. But we don't even think about the atmosphere. It's not even something, it's like, I think there's a Chinese saying that the fish doesn't know what water is, because it moves around it. It just takes it for granted. And that's what we are with the atmosphere. We don't think about it as a fluid medium full of resources and possible habitat for life. So that's a little bit of a hurdle that we're going to have to look at. But I think it's coming soon. I think probably in our lifetimes, we're going to see people finding all kinds of cool things living in the atmosphere.
You know, I realized pretty early on that we weren't going to be able, I don't feel like we're going to be able to catch a light in the sky and study it in the lab and, you know, ask it questions and stuff. And so a lot of people are saying, well, if we can't put our hands on it or put it under the microscope, then the only way we're going to really truly understand the phenomena is if we use our right brain. If we shut down our need for evidence, we use our right brain, we tune into ourselves, and we can telepathically communicate with these lights. Do you think that people are communicating with these lights? Do you think that's possible?
I don't know. I wonder if some people have a relationship with some of these lights or organisms or whatever they are. I mean, some people seem to think they do. Again, I think you have to look at the evidence and say, what do we actually see? People who say they have regular encounters with these things, well, you know, show us a video of that. Show us, have witnesses join you to see this. But I haven't seen that. Now, you mentioned that we might not be able to capture these things. I think that's not an unreasonable expectation. Again, it's a question of what we're looking for. I actually took a course. The European Space Agency offers some free courses online, and they had a course about monitoring atmospheric composition because I wanted to see the kind of tools that we have like right now to look at the atmosphere. And the thing that struck me after going through this course was that we're only finding and only seeing what we look for. We're not surveying it. You know, we're not saying, okay, what is everything here? Let's take big samples and see what we capture. You know, we're looking for specific things. So I think that's the next step, is to just do a biological survey of the atmosphere. Say, okay, what if this is a habitat? Where would we find this? And do it on a large scale. I think even something as simple as, you know, putting some big nets outside the space station. They regularly see these weird things moving around the space station. So I'm kind of amazed that we haven't even explored that possibility. And in fact, I'm thinking about proposing that, saying, hey, why don't you guys put some kind of a collection, filtering devices on the outside of the space station? Well, the next step from that, if we do collect some, well, put them in a pressurized container, bring them down to Earth, and then instead of having like aquariums like we have now, we might have like a aeroquarium, you know, a big pressurized environment where people can see these things, you know, swimming, flying back and forth. And so that could be done now in our lifetimes, to actually see these things brought down. Like we see deep sea creatures in aquariums, people see life that they'd never see otherwise. I think we have a possibility to do that, but we have to set our target on it and say, we want to do that before we're going to have it happen.
Yeah, you know, I hear so many stories about the lights in the sky being able to, and I see video of it too. They disappear and then they show up over there. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, for me, I feel like they would just leave the cage. You know what I mean? They would have that ability to just kind of do whatever they want. Like they have their own gravity. They have no concept of our space-time. It's like they don't even, space-time is just their playground.
Yeah, yeah.
And they can be anywhere and everywhere at all time. That Tic Tac video or one of the Navy videos, they're talking about how somehow or another they're thinking this the object or phenomena was able to move to their ending point, I think they called it. So it knew where they were going and was there waiting for them when they got there.
Well, think of people tend to look down on the mental capabilities and perceptual capabilities of invertebrates. We think they're just dumb things floating around. But we know that jellyfish have multiple eye-like organs around the exterior, you know, their bell. And think of how much more perceptive they are to movement in their environment with that kind of neural network than we are with our two eyes and our, you know, fatty brain. And if they're able to move around in the sky and they see a plane that we think is, you know, state-of-the-art, top-of-the-line plane going, whoosh, they look and go, look at that thing. It's going to be right over here. They can just zip right over there. And we're like, oh, that's magic. How does it do that? But to them, it's just a simple, like, you know, it's skipping around. Like we would jump around an ant. Saying, oh, that thing moving. You know, and then we haven't talked much about squid either. They're a fascinating creature, and they have some of the largest nerves, the biggest eyes in the animal kingdom that we know of. Their reactions are incredible. And people say, you know, when I've talked to witnesses to these lights that people see around the planet, the so-called mystery lights, people say that they seem to know when you're watching them. They react, so you think about it, if something's got better vision and better mobility than we do, they're going to know that we see them. They're going to know we're there before we even see them. So if they're smart, they'll probably stay away. But when people say they seem to react to them, obviously a lot of them do. I don't know if you've seen the videos of some of the guys that have shown lasers up into the sky.
Oh my gosh, yes, that's amazing.
And so
I'm 100% positive that we can affect them with electromagnetic pulses. I mean, Lou Elizondo has said it. ATIP is aware of it. It's a thing.
Yeah, and they jump around.
And I think we need to define what we mean when we say the light vision, because we can't just assume. I think a lot of times when we say something like that, a lot of people hear, oh, they can see me. Well, no, actually, they don't have an eyeball. They don't have the same makeup of seeing as a human does. Their way of sensing and seeing is completely different. What would that look like? What is their reality? How are they translating the world around us to them? We might just be a louder frequency over here that they're aware of, but they don't see that you have brown hair. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think we really have to kind of like remember that we are really anthropomorphizing these things so subconsciously, so deeply. We don't even realize we're doing it. We really have to kind of step back a little bit.
All the time we're doing that. And that's what we constantly have to remind ourselves, step outside our framework, step outside our point of view, our limited conception and perceptions of things. Like, you're right. I mean, something moving around that has this kind of capability, individuals might be glowing beacons of energy to them, really visible, even in the woods and stuff, but we're kind of, one of the big challenges is it's hard to conceive of something greater than ourselves, even size-wise and complexity. It's almost by definition, you can't grasp something or encompass something that's bigger than yourself. So to acknowledge and think, well, maybe there are some things bigger than ourselves. I mean, we know there are things smaller and faster than we can perceive. Why couldn't there be things that are bigger and perhaps even they might move faster than we even can perceive? And we see some of these things with the objects in the sky. They're beyond our ability to even perceive, much less conceive. So that's where we got to stretch some.
They move so quickly. We were talking about this earlier, how we need to kind of film them in at least 60 frames per second, because I feel like we're missing so much information. I'm sure you've seen Dorothy Izot's documentary, Capturing the Light.
Yes.
Have you? Okay,
Yeah.
And then she has that one frame and the light's doing like 30 frames worth of movement in one frame. How is that possible? So I think we need to somehow figure out how to shoot 60 frames per second or higher. One thing I wanted to talk to you about was the sea creature idea and angel's hair, or also it's called silicious cotton or Madonna's present. And it's described as a webbed jelly substance that falls to the ground. And it kind of makes me think of what you would think of tentacles. Is that what you're thinking too?
Well, that's one of the parallels that we see. Did you see the little comparison that I did with the angel hair and the tentacles?
I don't think so, no.
Let me pull that up, because it's very similar. I mean, they've actually analyzed some of it. One of the challenges that we have with some of the material that falls from these objects in the sky, and people have regularly reported material falling from objects in the sky, sometimes the objects themselves, is that they seem to evaporate, or actually more accurately, kind of sublimate. They turn from a sort of a gelatinous material into gas almost as quickly as like a jellyfish evaporating on the beach.
By touching it, right? Is it that one?
Well, some people have touched it, and this is another parallel. Some people have touched the jelly or the residue that's there, and they have like a tingling in their hands. Sometimes it lasts for days. And so this is a caution. I would, anybody that sees one of these things, whether it's moving or whether it's dead, I would avoid being anywhere near. In fact, if one of them shows interest to you, I'd get the cover right away. But people have reported that kind of tingling in their hands. But there was a famous case in the 1950s where these Philadelphia policemen saw this purple light coming down to the ground, and they fell in a vacant lot. And they went over to it, and it was about, I think they said 5 feet across, and it was pulsing. and they thought it was alive, and they watched it, and it was glowing and pulsing, and they called for backup, and the time before the backup came, it just evaporated. It disappeared. So that's one of the challenges, is trying to collect samples of this material when it just basically evaporates. Now, some people have collected some of this angel hair, and the analysis of it sort of parallels some of the organic compounds that we find in marine invertebrates. So I think that's one of the challenges, and one of the areas that we can actually look at is, trying to collect samples of these objects. I mean, one of the gentlemen that I consulted with as I was working on this hypothesis was a former NASA engineer. His name was William Corliss, and he wrote a series of books about things we don't know. And he had a whole book on weird luminous atmospheric phenomena. I mean, it's like this thick, and it's all just cool, weird things that people, scientists have reported, things moving through the atmosphere. And to me, like 70% of them, you can say, well, that looks like a marine organism. Balls moving on underpasses, things like worms moving through the sky. And I said, well, how would we prove this? How would we prove this hypothesis? He said, well, you'll need a body. So that's our challenge. How do we collect something and store it and analyze it when it might be totally so diaphanous that it just, comes down to our level, it just poof, just turns into, vapor. So how do you collect something like that?
Well, I mean, if we know that the limitation is that we can't touch the thing, or it dissolves or disintegrates to who knows what, that's a consideration. Does that mean that we're out of luck, or are there other ways to quote unquote catch a body? Can we catch a body through radar? Can we catch a body in video? And for me, I kind of feel like we can, and we need to be a little bit more aware of the different ways we need to do that to really, really kind of prove that this is actually happening. These are what we think they are.
Well, I think that's what our challenge is okay, if this stuff was easy, somebody would have done it already. So this is kind of our challenge, is first of all, how do we get good images of them? How would we collect samples of them? And you talked about filming things in high frame rates to try and get better images, and that would be the ideal. But right now, our limitations are to shoot at like 60 frames per second, and that eats up a lot of memory. It eats up a lot of resources. It takes a lot of power, and you have to be ready for it when it happens. And these things move; they don't come on command, so you can't just keep shooting at 60 frames per second. Or you're gonna burn up all your memory. So the challenge is, how do you look at a spot? And if they are some kind of creatures, they don't appear regularly. They're going to appear according to conditions, according to habitats, according to their movement. We do see some similarities with life cycles with some of these creatures. They appear a lot of times around the tropics, where it's warm and moist. They appear seasonally. We don't seem to see as many of them in the colder areas in the winter months. So the question is, how do you go there and run off the 60 frames per second while while nothing's there, and try and capture it before it's there? When I had my documentary, The Cohogue Light, covers some lights that people had seen near West Point, Virginia. And we were down there, we had 5 cameras. We had a low light camera, we had a high speed camera, we had a couple other cameras. And we're watching the tracks where the light is supposed to appear. And there were some trees off to the sideline. And a light came down from the sky towards the tops of the trees and hovered there, and it flashed. And then a bright light from the tops of the trees flashed back. And then the light on top of the trees flashed even brighter back at the light on the trees, and went whoosh, and zipped away. Now we had 5 people who were looking for weird phenomena, 5 cameras, and we all said, did anybody get that? Nobody got it. So it shows you, these things happen like that. So it's like, to be able to capture something, I think you're going to have to look at like a long-term, pretty resource-rich effort. And my recommendation is that we do it over a number of different locales, so our chances of success would be higher. Instead of just staying at one spot, I think we have to, dedicate ourselves. And I think that's one of the challenges why we haven't found this stuff, because they aren't like a deer where you're going to find them. They're pretty mobile. They're pretty unpredictable, and they're fast as heck. They can be in and out of your frame, in and out of your field of vision just before you have a chance to react. So here's that picture of I found someone took a picture of angel hair. And these are tentacles of a jellyfish on the right side. I inverted them just so you could see. But look at the similarity of structures there.
Yeah. Yeah. And those were just that, those are the ones that if you touch them, they disintegrate.
Right.
So
And
this picture you have must have been the one, I think it lasted 2 years was the longest they were able to have this in some sort of like container. And
yeah,
then even then it finally went away.
Yeah, they capped it. They kept it in a closed container, and they were able to keep it for a while. And then, you mentioned some of the terms that you were mentioning for what were you talking about? The other what the other name for angel hair? What did you call it? Madonna's.
Madonna's present and siliceous cotton.
See, I hadn't even heard those terms before. That's fascinating stuff. But the blobs that fall from the sky, there was even a term in Welsh called, I think, puertercer, and I'm not sure how you pronounce it. That's how you pronounce it, but it means rot of the stars. And so these things were so common, people would see a star falling to the ground, a lighted object falling to the ground. They'd run there, and there'd be a blob of jelly that was glowing, and then it would gradually fade and then disappear. But they actually had a term for it, puertercer. So, but if you look again, you check the internet, blobs falling from the sky. There was actually.
What do you do in your free time?
Check out blobs falling from the sky. Actually, it was an unsolved mysteries about a rain of jelly in Washington State, where it covered this whole town. These little blobs of jelly fell out of the sky onto cars, and they apparently they made some people sick, and some pets got so sick from being exposed to it that they died. So it's there's weird stuff going on in the atmosphere. It's a huge, varied place.
Yeah, you were talking about how are we going to catch one so we can study it, and you mentioned a net. And in my mind, I don't think a physical net would work. I mean, obviously, why not try it? Why not? But if it doesn't work, I feel like kind of like a digital net would be a good idea. Just some sort of like two-dimensional net that would kind of be able to record this thing in multiple variances. And it reminded me of this quote that I found, and I wanted to bring it up because it's from a hardcore skeptic. He is a PhD in astronomy at the University of Virginia. His name is Phil Plait. He writes for Slate.com and a couple of other publications. And he wrote an article called UFOs Over Denver Bug Me. He says, those aren't UFOs. Those are bugs, insects. Insects flying around in front of the camera, insects that can hover, change direction, zip away, insects that look like blobs because they're close to the camera, which was set to focus on infinity, insects which were lit by the sun so they flash a bit when they change direction. They're insects. Simply going back and using two cameras side by side would show for sure whether these things are far away or close by. So here's a skeptic. He's noticing that they look like insects, right? It's undeniable that they move like insects.
Sure.
He's thinking, oh, it's because these people are stupid and it's actually like right in front of the camera lens. But you and I both know, and the government now knows, and it's pretty much public awareness now that they really are UAP type phenomena, things up there that move like insects. In fact, Tom DeLonge said that the government people in the know call UAP the bugs. Right,
well,
but his idea that we have two cameras side by, on either side of each other, that would form that digital net. There's so many ways that we can, I think, understand this more. And you know what? Maybe they're already doing it.
I don't know. I mean, I've actually researched a lot of scientific databases because I thought somebody has to be looking into this. I mean, and I haven't found any evidence of that. I've looked at NASA's databases, the National Science Foundation's databases, and I can find no studies of this. The only studies, now, I had looked at the idea of, this sort of brings us to another topic, which is kind of the branding. What do you call these objects? What do you call the science? And I had talked about the idea of aerobiology, the study of living things in the sky. And there is an existing science of aerobiology. It actually started the beginning of last century when scientists and doctors were noticing that people in hospitals were getting sick. So they looked at how air moving through the hospitals might be spreading germs. And so that spread to the idea, well, okay, things move through the atmosphere, bugs, spores, and birds. Okay, and so there is an existing science of aerobiology, but it's pretty much rooted to the idea that, you know, things come off the ground, move through the air for part of their life cycles, and then come back down. They're looking at, you know, plant diseases, insects, but I don't think any of them are looking at the idea that it might be, you know, other types of invertebrates moving through the atmosphere. So it's kind of, you know, that seems like a natural, we could expand the concept of aerobiology. But some of these things actually move through the water. So again, we don't want to draw lines and, you know, and omit certain things just because it's easier for us to conceive of things. Now, the scientists that mentioned that what people were seeing were bugs, he's probably right. A lot of them probably are bugs, and people want to see magical things, amazing things. But on the other hand, the other side of the coin, I don't know why it is, but people want to grasp onto any explanation they can. Like when somebody sees something amazing, they go, "Oh, somebody 100 miles away was shooting off a bottle rocket. It was that. That's the answer." And I go, "Well, why do you got to find it? Can't you just say we don't know what it is? And, you know, why do you got to find an answer?" But people have this kind of innate need to explain these things.
Why do you think that is? You think it's like a fear?
I don't know. I think part of it is fear. Part of it wants to think, oh, we're in control. We know what's going on. And it's a little bit scary for people to say, oh, there's a huge, vast area up there that we don't know what's going on. And there might be a lot of things moving around up there, a lot of crazy creatures that we don't even know about. So that leads to another point, which is for a long time, we've been calling them unidentified, unknown. At a certain point, we're going to have to let go of unidentified and say, okay, let's take care of it. Some of these things might be something, you know, so what are we going to call them? And that's kind of like, you know, branding. And what do we call these things? You know, we got you know, porpoises, we got birds, very nice, simple sounding words. You know, what do you call these things? One person who looked at these things in the 50s, Trevor James Constable, he called them critters. In fact, one of the astronauts, Scott Carpenter, said, you know, we wondered, when that one famous clip, we wondered if there were living critters up there. Have you heard Carpenter say that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the CIA said it, you know,
right.
It's obvious.
But the term critters just doesn't do it for me, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So we got to think, you know, what do we call these things? And one of the kickers for me, a kind of a eureka moment, was when I saw the first image of a sprite. And you know, that happened, you know, in my lifetime, that pilots had reported seeing weird things above the atmosphere. And one Davis Sentman at the University of Alaska at Fairbanks said, well, let's go look and see. And they got the first, in fact, let me show it to you, the first image of a sprite. So that happened, like, you know, only recently in the past 25 years. But the term sprites, I don't know if that quite does them justice. I mean, they look more like giant sky gods to me, but that's kind of a, you know, I had been toying with this idea of, you know, jellyfish in the sky, and I looked at the first thing I thought was, wow, it looks like some kind of creature emerging from the atmosphere.
Mm.
And since then, so that was kind of a eureka moment. That was back when, you know, that was big news at the time. And they said, well, they're electric phenomena, and they're a form of lightning that's so quick that we can't see it. Here's some more sprites. This is a GIF of some sprites flashing in the atmosphere.
It's hard to get a frame of reference because it's just a black screen.
Right. Let me see if
these things are large, aren't they?
Let me see if I can find one that has a frame of reference. But here, actually, this is one of the, someone zoomed in and had a great image of a sprite here. This is of the bottom of a sprite. And these things can be, you know, 100 miles tall.
Wow.
Now, look at this thing. Does this look like just electric?
Lightning?
No,
it looks like nerve endings.
I mean, they look like tentacles, and they look like there's like little nodules, and there's some kind of structure here. Look at these filaments.
Yeah.
Now, so, you know, at first they thought they were just like instantaneous forms of lightning, and then they found out they could find the same sprites for up to 30 minutes. So these things are persisting. There's many of them that have the same kind of shape, which you think if they were just lightning, they wouldn't have the same shape. And they have gravity waves around them. So they're disturbing the atmosphere so much that they're huge waves of gravity coming from these things.
How do you know that? How did you figure? Is that what they figured out?
There's a scientific study. I cited, if you go to my website, The Living Sky, there's an article I wrote that's kind of like a capsule version of all this called The Sky is Alive. And it sort of presents a lot of this evidence. And there was a study, let's see if I can find the reference right here, from 2003. Simultaneous observations of mesospheric gravity waves and sprites generated by a Midwestern thunderstorm. So this is, again, I see Davis Sentman's name is here. And he was from the University of Alaska at Fairbanks. And there's several other authors, but they found that these sprites were generating these giant gravity waves. They also found that they were, a 2005 study found that infrasound was produced by sprites. So that's really deep, like rumbling sounds that these things generate. And in both cases, they described it as something like something swimming through the atmosphere. So there are these giant things up there, and we found, I think, the space shuttle Columbia, before it broke up, one of their last experiments was looking at sprites in the atmosphere. And they found that these sprites were there. We tend to think of them over just thunderstorms, but they were there in the atmosphere, even in the daylight, even when there weren't thunderstorms. So you have these giant objects up to 100 miles tall, pulsing, moving through the atmosphere. And what does that, I mean, that's got to have some kind of effect on the chemical composition of our atmosphere, the life cycle, the activities of these creatures. And that's another reason I think we need to study these things, because we don't want to mess things up too much, because that might be a delicate mechanism by which the atmosphere is maintained or created. You know, these creatures, there might be some sort of bio layer to Earth's atmosphere where there are these living creatures that create this kind of dynamic, you know, this dynamic medium. So I think one of the challenges, though, is branding, because sprites, it's not doing it. But we got to come up with a better one, Krista. Okay, this is a series of sprites. Now, if you look at the bottom of the picture here, this is the horizon at the bottom down here.
Okay.
Okay, and these above there is a layer of giant thunderstorms. Okay, so they're on the plains of the United States, and they're filming towards the west. And these sprites are approaching. So the sprites, let me just go through it frame by frame. They're above the tops of the thunderstorms.
Yeah.
And look at the like stalk-like structure of these things. That one flashes. There's another one. This guy these two pick it up. Look, there's more in the background. Think of the dimensionality of this. How far in the distance these things go. Look at the structure of these things, how similar they are.
And why don't you think that this is just a natural electrical phenomena?
Have you ever seen lightning that maintained the same shape like that?
Yeah, yeah.
Here's a marine invertebrate on the right. And here's a sprite on the left. And you can see they've got kind of a similar stalk-like structure.
Yeah.
The central stalk and then these things branching off. But
so if these things, if that's a life cycle, like we said earlier, like the professor of etymology said earlier, if these are life cycles, are the cycles just days or if hours?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that would be really, really fast maturity there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, the reason invertebrates are successful is because a lot of them have different individuals in different stages of the life cycle at all times. So there might be mature adults, there might be eggs, there might be larvae, there might be, you know, the budding forms, there might be the cysts, all at the same time. And they're able to react to the conditions. But that's a question that I've had is, you know, what are these things living and growing, and, you know, are they moving much faster than us, or could their time scale be much longer than ours? I mean, it might be both. I mean, there's been study of some kinds of jellyfish where when conditions are unfavorable, they can actually regress through their forms of maturity. So it's kind of a immortality. You know, when things are bad, they regress, they become like a younger form. Then when conditions improve, they grow up again. Then they go back and they go. So it's like, well, where does it end? So there's a type of life that we don't quite understand it all yet.
So when I'm sure you've seen the videos where we see them and then that disappears and then it comes back again, right? That's very common. where do you think, if these are atmospheric creatures, where do they go and how do they come back again?
I don't know, but I think that part of that might be the limits of our perception and the limits of our our recording equipment. Yeah, as somebody who's spent time, looking at these things, what you see with your eye and what you record on the camera is different. So when I look at, when we see things, when we see videos, we got to realize that we're only seeing part of the whole picture. One of the cameramen I worked with was pointing out to me, even if you had the best lens in the world, on the clearest day, that after a couple miles, the atmosphere has such material in it. There's water vapor, there's dust. You're just not going to be able to see. I mean, we think, we look up and they say, oh, there's the sun, oh, there's the stars. There's nothing up there. It's clear, but it's not. There's like this huge, especially if you're looking towards the horizon, things are much thicker. So for something to seem to disappear, it might just have to move slightly out of our range of vision and then back in and out. It seems to disappear. And the idea of bioluminescence, when people talk about a giant light near them that just seem to disappear, it might be as simple as it just blinks out and you just don't see it anymore because the lights are gone.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to bring up during our conversation was in my research, I've noticed these lights are bright. If I adjust the brightness and contrast, I always see what I call the jelly bean light, or it's like this source of light within the light. And it turns out the light looks kind of misty. Can you see this?
I can.
Okay, so there's this example, and I have many. Okay, here's another, and they kind of form these blobs, right? This spherical center with a multicolored mist that surrounds it.
Okay.
Which I feel like could be akin to electrical Cecilia, or Cecilia. Not sure how they, but like tentacles in a way.
Okay.
So I wanted to hear your opinion on what you think this is.
I think we have to be careful about drawing conclusions. I mean, like I said, we want to find answers. I think we have to look at what's there and try and observe what's there. Now, I know in a lot of marine invertebrates, there are bioluminescent structures that are part of the body, and they aren't necessarily the whole body, and some of them do it in different ways. Some of them have like a giant central light organ. Some of them have numerous ones around the edges. Some of them that cover their whole body, and some of them actually have like capsules where they keep symbiotic bacteria to that generate light. Check this guy out, and look at all that stuff that's around the light.
Yeah, he looks pretty solid though, doesn't he?
He does, but that's pretty close, and that's in the ocean. Now imagine if he's up in the atmosphere. If that's up in the atmosphere.
Yeah, you're right. It would be pretty see-through.
Yeah, so there's just tons of here's another there's another one here that had a very beautiful, like, look at this gorgeous thing. Oh, but that's tiny. It should have gotten bigger.
Yeah, it seems like it has that inner glow, and then the external of it isn't as bright.
Yeah, and there are many different forms of bioluminescent jellies. Some of them, like they have it on the ends of their tentacles, some of them in their body, some around the edges of their main structure, their main bell. So for anybody that's interested in this topic, I would suggest, checking out, just looking at jellyfish sometimes. Look at bioluminescent jellyfish and bioluminescent squid, and just look at the amazing light shows that they put on. Because there's a lot of people describe their encounters, their closer encounters with these things. They say they were giving off lights that I can't even describe. Like these wondrous terms. They say, I don't even have words to describe the colors of the lights. And so you think, well, that's pretty weird. They're going beyond our spectrum. We can't even use the names we have for colors. So
yeah.
Well,
I think that's a good place to stop. I think we've covered everything we wanted to go over. Can you think of anything else?
Well, I would just say that, if any people want to explore this topic more, they can check out, my website, thelivingsky.com. I have a couple documentaries on there. We didn't even talk about the NASA evidence. So there's a whole documentary I did which said, okay, if these things are in the sky, we might have seen them, NASA might have seen them. There is absolutely historical evidence for this that I don't understand why nobody's, it's like as important as the first time anybody looked through a microscope. And there's footage of that there, and there's also footage when I went out into the field and said, okay, if these things are there, we should see them at some of these places where people see mystery lights. And we actually captured some of these objects that nobody's ever seen before. So I would suggest if somebody wants to go there, they can see those things. If they check out the code word, the living sky, they'll get 20% off.
The Wild River in rural Virginia. Legends of ghostly railroad brakemen, Confederate soldiers. He's coming back with the lantern looking for his head. The light is actually the lantern. Strange glowing lights in the night. All point to a mystery of the living sky.
Okay, now this right here is one of the lights that we recorded, moving over the tracks. And these are some of the other lights we recorded. So this thing came down. This thing zipped across. This is one of the lights we saw go moving across the tracks. And it kind of pulses and moves away. This thing moved across the tops of the trees. And you can see that right here, there's almost like, look at the light. We don't know if, I mean, it's spreading out through the atmosphere. It's so bright. And I don't know if it's illuminating some kind of structure or if it's just distortion through the lens. We used a low light camera to get that. And then there was another one here. A bat had swooped down to this branch, and then this thing comes down and zips away. Here's a closer shot of it.
Were you able to film fireflies as well for comparison?
Absolutely. And if you look at the documentary, there's tons of fireflies. And in fact, it's an amazing show of bioluminescent organisms. So we showed tons of fireflies, and then these other things were much, much bigger. And actually, the fireflies were there mostly in late May and June, and some of the brighter things that we saw were in later summer and earlier autumn. So if you think of invertebrates getting bigger as the season progresses, that's kind of what we would expect, is that kind of growth of the mature individuals as the season went on. So the coolest one we saw was I think it was early September. There was that big one coming down to the trees like that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that's awesome. I think we've covered a lot.
Thank you so much for the chance to talk with you, Krista. It's been fun sharing all these ideas with you.
I know, and such a unique way of doing it. I think that's going to be nice for everyone who's listening to be able to see what we're talking about as we say it, because it's one thing to hear it. It's another thing to see it. And I think those two things really kind of need to come together. Seeing is believing.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, what's better evidence than video? I mean, is that arguable?
So I think we got to be skeptical too. I don't know if you heard about several years ago, there were a lot of really interesting UFO videos coming out of Australia. And this guy had done this whole internet thing. Oh, I got another one. And they were really kind of cool. They were just sort of, not quite clear enough, but tantalizing. And I think he released a dozen of them or so. And at the end, he went, haha, it was all an art project that I was funded to do. And it's like, what was the point of that? And so we got to be kind of skeptical too. Think of the source and, can people duplicate it? Like you said, the two cameras will give us an idea of, what we're really seeing will give us some triangulation. So, always be skeptical and think, let's test it. If something seems to be the case, let's go find more evidence to try and back it up.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you so much, Scott. I'm so glad that we got to speak. I love how similar our theories are and how we kind of have this convergent way of coming to an answer. And I hope that we just remember to always remember that we don't know the answer. We're just kind of trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we're here for.
The journey is the destination. So thanks for the opportunity, Krista. It's been a joy and an honor to talk with you. And let's keep in touch. Keep me posted about your new stuff. And I'd love to, keep you posted. The next thing I think I'm going to try and do is something. I spent a lot of days and nights out in the mosquito-ridden wilds of Virginia trying to get this light. And part of me thinks, well, I'm not going to be able to do it alone. So part of me thinks, well, we got to mount a bigger campaign and get a lot of people looking up and trying to get some good evidence. I think that's our next step. And how to do that, I'm still working on it.
Well, I have a lot of people who are very into this type of stuff at a Facebook group I started called The Lights in the Sky. I think just it's really kind of helping people come together and share their videos and share their images in real time with people like them. And of course, it's going to be difficult because you have people from all different walks of life. You have your scientific, analytical people, but then you have your more right-brained people, and they're trying to come together without poking at each other in some sort of annoying kind of way, right?
Yeah.
Because you want them to believe you wherever you stand. I think that's a good way to start, but it would be nice to have a more structured coming together of ideas where we aren't afraid to understand that this might be something more than what we're being told, which is the ET hypothesis, I think, is a really big one that really doesn't have any backing. For example, the government disclosure came out and they said, yes, UAP are real. Yes, we don't know what they are. And no, there's not any evidence that it's ET, And I don't think they're lying. I really don't think they're lying. I feel like there isn't evidence that it's ET, and we need to kind of like accept that and maybe kind of come up with a plan B instead of just trying to shove that square into that circle.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it's a good point. I think people looking for some kind of disclosure when all of a sudden the truth is going to be, okay, here it is. I think they're going to be waiting a long time. I think it's up to a whole network of, scientists and seekers and people who are willing to be skeptical and look at the evidence before we kind of cobble together this view of this huge thing, that encircles our planet, that makes life possible for us here on the bottom of that ocean of air. So.
One quote I hear a lot from a lot of people in this field is the Sherlock Holmes quote, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And I kind of get what they're saying with that. And I think that's great. You want to keep going with this idea that you have. But at a certain point, when are you spinning your wheels? When are you going so far down the wrong path that you never even allow yourself to get on the proper path to truth? Right? Because you do want so bad for this one thing to be real. So if you're just doing it on your free time and you have no expectations and your one and only objective is to prove that aliens exist, and that's how you want to spend your time, that's fine. But if you really truly want to know truth, you need to look at that other path, right? You need to go where the evidence goes. And you've been doing that, and I really respect that and I appreciate it. I'm so glad that you were with me on this first episode. I think we'll have to talk again in the future. And anything else?
No, I think that's it, Krista. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you. You're doing great work. It's an honor to talk with you, and I wish you the best of luck with your series here. I think you got a great idea. There's a lot of really people with really fascinating ideas, and I look forward to seeing what you do with it. So,
thank you so much. All right. Bye, guys.